Hello, everybody, and welcome to another comedian's interview for my blog and podcast, A Rich Comic Life. My name is Richard Gill, and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 1,000 comedians over the last 47 years. I'm delighted to welcome my guest today, Ania Magliano. Yes!
Hello!
Hello!
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for doing it. Thank you so much. How are you? You all right?
Yes, I'm good. I can't believe you've seen over 1,000 comedians.
It's so sad,
That's
isn't
so many.
it? my first one was 1974, which would have been Les
Wow.
Dawson. So there you go.
Oh,
Yeah. And
wow.
then from there, I've gone right the way through. Thanks so much for doing this. We're going to be talking for about an hour about your comedy career. And I'd like to go way back to the start and ask you first, how did you become a comedian in the first place?
Okay, well, also I want to say, like at the start of this, I'm still very early on in my career, so I feel honoured that you've asked me to do this, but I am worried that in like who knows, in like 2 years I'll listen back to this and be like, oh my god, what a naive idiot. So I'm going to
Never.
caveat this by saying this is what I think at this time in my life, but
Indeed.
I might not have these opinions about comedy for the rest of time. Um, so I started. How did I become a comedian? I kind of did things that were adjacent to comedy since I was a teenager.
Right.
When I was when I was like 15 years old, or maybe even 14, I started putting like comedy videos on YouTube, um, where it was like I didn't really know that stand up existed in a way that wasn't a big live at the Apollo special, and
Yeah.
I didn't really realize that anyone could do it. So I did know that stand-up comedy existed, but I didn't really know that that's what I wanted to do. So what I was doing was like putting videos on YouTube where I just like talk to the camera about one topic, and so it's kind of like writing a routine of or sort or like something along those lines. But I wasn't. Yeah, I don't really know what I thought I was doing, but I did quite well on it. Like I got quite a few subscribers. Sometimes they still come to my shows, people who
Brilliant.
knew me from then. Um, and then I went up to the Fringe, which I know I'm sure we'll talk about later. But I went up to the Fringe for the first time to work there and saw the whole world of live comedy and just live performance in general, and was like, oh, this is amazing, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
So then I did comedy at uni, and then like moved to London to kind of do it. Then there was a pandemic, and now we're post-pandemic and I'm a comedian.
Fantastic. What sort of year was this then when you first started?
So I went to uni. My first year of uni was 2017,
Right.
or 2016 would have been. It would have been the like some the what's the season? Autumn.
Autumn.
Completely
Yeah, yeah.
blanked on the word for autumn there.
Don't worry about
It's Sunday morning,
it.
and I did a lot of sketch comedy when I
Right.
first started,
Right.
which I do like, but I didn't like the kind of fact that you have to always rely on someone else to be like as around and like as interested in it, and you can kind of, if something goes wrong, you can kind of both avoid it, or you can blame the other person. Not probably not if you're in a good sketch group. But I like doing stand up more because it feels more like your own voice, and
Yeah.
it's you have control over it.
The wonderful thing is that it is personal to you. Once you go out and hit the stage, you embrace the audience and you can basically say what you like.
Yeah.
It is extraordinary to watch as well as perform. I would imagine, if you get a good night, everybody says, oh, it seems to be like a drug when you get the laughter going. It's an extraordinary thing to watch. So where was your first ever gig and what was it like? Was this at university?
No, so I did my first gig in London. So
Right.
I came back from the Edinburgh Fringe on, it was like obviously the last day of August or like early September, and I booked into like the first open mic I could find in
Brilliant.
London. And it was in It was a night that I don't think runs anymore, which is probably for the best, called Famous First Words.
Wow.
And so it was like, it was very aimed at new comedians. And I remember like walking to the gig, and it was just, I had no idea what to expect, like no idea at all. And it was a pub in, I can't remember where it is, but it's somewhere near the Arsenal playing ground.
Right.
It was an Arsenal themed pub.
North London way.
Yeah, it was somewhere in North London, and I think it was called the Gunners.
Right.
And if you go in, it's like a normal pub, but if you look at the ceiling, they have like murals of all the players painted onto the ceiling.
Wow.
So there are like all these Arsenal players looking down at you, but like none of the paintings are very good. So it's just like these kind of like weird distorted like men on the ceiling. I was like, what is this? And there was about maybe like 5 or 6 comedians on the lineup. No audience apart from 2 guys at the back of the pub who were there to use the pub, but were like, well, we can't not watch it because it was only one room. And I can't remember who else was on the lineup apart from one guy called David McIver, who's a very funny comedian who's now based in Edinburgh, I think.
I've heard of him, yeah.
And he was I went on, I did my 5 minutes, which was not great. I can't remember what it was about, apart from, I remember I had tried to write a routine about Apple AirPods, but this was in 2017 when they had only just been announced as like a concept. And I think I'd seen like a news article about them and was like, this is going to be a great observational bit, and no one knew what they were. So I had like my 5 minutes on Apple AirPods, and everyone was like, what is she talking about? And it probably wasn't funny either.
Wow.
But David was very, he was so lovely to me, and he was like, you've got to keep going because this isn't what it's always like.
Yeah.
Like, there are audiences, and there are, just keep going. And I think he told me some other nights to go to. So then after that, I kind of did mostly stuff at uni, but then would also kind of do more like open mics in London. But and I have done some with that small an audience since then, but I can just handle it a bit better.
Well, you keep going, because what you do is wonderful. I had a similar experience. I once went and performed comedy, my one and only time. I thought, get it out your system, because I'm supporting them forevermore, etc., etc. So the promoter said to me, it's an open mic night where you get, where it's a gong show where you could get booed. The worst thing imaginable. So I walked out.
Terrifying.
I walked out. There was 3 old people in the crowd, and the first line I said to them was, people think I look like Eddie the Eagle Edwards, the ski jumper, which I do, but I can't see the resemblance myself. And one old bloke at the back just went, fuck off, and got me off.
No way.
And the promoter said, have another go. So I did another show for them, and a similar thing happened, and I thought, I will support them forevermore. Never say never again, but that was my experience of having to go.
That sounds like a very, very stressful first gig. I have to say, even now, I've been going for quite a while, and I've done quite a lot of different types of rooms, but I still avoid gong shows.
Oh.
Like, there are a few clubs around London where where the entrance route is via a gong show, and I'm just like, well, I guess I'm never doing that club though, because I can't take that. And also, I feel like it relies on a very certain style of joke, and I mean, you've seen me, I have at times quite long-winded jokes that are a bit wordy, that's like, the drunk audience are not going to be like, we want to hear this long story about your heritage right now.
It was an experience, I can tell you. So there you are doing your 5 minutes in clubs in pubs to get you going. Did you have friends along supporting you? Because I go to a lot of up and coming new comedy clubs, and everybody's there with a friend. Were they all supportive of your gigs?
Yeah, that's such a funny question, because I haven't really thought about how many friends I dragged along.
Sorry.
No, it's great. And to be honest, I owe them one. But like, I also just remember being very excited to post about, like, on social media, about every gig I was doing. I shared it, I shared it on Facebook, being like, please come to this, with like anything I was doing. A lot of the nights I did were bringers, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, is like where you're doing a 5-minute spot and you have to bring someone who isn't performing to be an audience member. So that's how they get a crowd. I think I was quite lucky in, actually it wouldn't have been then, but when a couple years later, maybe 1 or 2 years later, I was in a relationship. So I just had a boyfriend to bring to all of those. So he, bless him, came to a lot of my comedy, which I think is, now I'm not in a relationship, and I don't bring people to gigs anymore. And if anything, now I'm like, I don't want people to come. Like, you can come to a show when it's finished, but like, now I see it more as like work, where it's like you wouldn't necessarily bring a friend to work.
No.
But and it's also just like, I'm worried that I'll do badly, and then we'll just have to awkwardly have a conversation about it afterwards, when they'll be like, it was really good, and I'll be like, you don't have to say that.
With them being so many comedians in Britain now, if you like, there are so many different ones. Did you ever find it difficult to get gigs or get booked or anything like that?
I think so. I think it's also just like it feels like a bit of a mystery at first.
Yeah.
And my route in was, I guess, through Facebook. Like, I joined a lot of Facebook groups about comedy open mics. And I don't know how people did comedy before that, because I'm like, that's how I found out about all these open mics. And, it would be going to a kind of comedy club and meeting someone that you get along with, and them kind of like giving you some tips and that sort of thing. And I think I found it hard to kind of, okay, let me restart my answer. I kind of understood that, like, part of it is just, emailing people and not really getting a response, but you just keep going, and then, like, it's just like anything where you kind of have to keep pushing to do what you want to do. But I think the thing that makes it sometimes feel like it's hard to break through, or makes it feel harder, is like comparing yourself to other people.
Sure.
And I think the only times that I felt like it was hard was because I was too focused on being like, well, that person's doing something that I haven't done, but we're at the same level, so like, why did they get it and not me? Which is, like, I think a very natural instinct to have in any job. You'd always worry about, like, it's a very human thing, and I think now I'm way better at being like, there are so many different circumstances, it doesn't matter. It's life, and I feel like much more calm about those sort of things. But I think there were definitely initial periods where I was like, what am I doing wrong? Like, what am I not doing enough of? That, like, I can't get onto these certain things. But also, to be honest, I think a lot of the time I just wasn't necessarily putting as much work into my comedy as I was, like, worrying about my comedy. Whereas now I think I feel very much like my philosophy is just like, your writing and your performance is like the only thing within your control.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that I focus on. And like, I think like the kind of breaking through thing, I also feel very lucky that I've come at a point where there's been like a bit more awareness about, representation of different types of people in comedy. That, initially at uni, I will say it was very male heavy.
Right.
And that was really, really hard. And that's probably the time that I got like most angry about it. And I remember it was like, all the comedy society was like pretty much all men. And I got so annoyed that I started my own comedy society for women.
Brilliant, that's brilliant.
And with 2 other girls, we set it up. And the other comedy society, very male heavy, it was all like auditioned. You had to get in, audition. It was very like that. And we were like, ours is an open mic. Anyone can come and do it.
Yeah.
And everyone loved it. And it's still going to this day.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that, actually.
Well done, you. That's it's so true, because if you're funny, you're funny. It doesn't matter whether you're male, female, or whatever. You know, if you get up and have a go and do it, and you're very funny, keep doing it, because it's the most positive thing. That's why the blog exists. What do you like to talk about on stage?
So I think I'm getting to a point where I like to be quite like honest on stage, and I feel like most. This is going to sound a bit pretentious, but I'm going to say it. I feel most like connected to the audience when I'm talking about something that feels very true to me.
Yeah.
And the audience is responding.
Sure.
Like it's just the most amazing feeling to be like, I've kind of been a bit vulnerable with something that's happened in my life, or usually it is something that's happened in my life, or like my opinions on something, and for the audience to respond, it's just like this amazing feeling of being like, oh, it's all going to be okay. I think when I first started, I was much more like kind of worried about writing very like structured jokes.
Yeah.
That were like set up punchlines, and that's not to say my act was like really, really funny with gags at every turn, but it just wasn't as truthful, and it wasn't like.
Sure.
It was kind of a bit more like reading a bunch of vaguely connected jokes rather than like kind of a performance like about my life and my opinions. I think at the moment the stuff that I'm talking about is all quite personal, but as I kind of get more confident and more experience, I find that I'm kind of writing stuff that it doesn't necessarily always tie back to me. Because I think the only thing that stops me is like being a little bit worried that like I might not be able to kind of back it up. Because if it's about you, it's about if it's right what you know and you know yourself, then you're like, well, I know I'm getting this right. But that's why I find like political comedy and stuff so incredible to watch, because I would get so nervous doing it, because I'd be like, what if there's a bit that I haven't researched enough and I've got it wrong? That sort of thing. But I do think I used to try and write like really long routines about, you know, just like one thing, because I saw like loads of comedians do that, and I was like, that shows you're good at comedy. But like, I don't think I'm that good yet that I always know what the funny thing is. I feel like at the moment I just like prefer to talk about my life and like my personal experiences, and that seems to be what's also working.
I think watching you on stage, you have this wonderful, endearing quality to you, as I said at the start, where you can go out onto a stage and the audience are with you from the very start, and you can talk about anything that you like, really. And I think that what comedians try and do is find a uniqueness and an originality to their style of performing, and that's why people keep going back and keep endearing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so, and I think because this is something that I've been thinking about recently as well. It's kind of like, as you said, there are so many comedians. Yeah. It's like when it's some the reason that you pick someone is like a comedian that you would go and see like an hour show of or whatever isn't necessarily because you're like they have the most jokes in an hour, you know, or because it's like the whole package. It's like them as a person. You're like interested in them and their perspective, and like I think I've seen like lots of shows where, you know, the different amounts I've laughed like that's not what's in my head. It's about the whole experience of watching someone, and them as a person is just as important as like how well written are their jokes.
Completely agree. Absolutely. How do you remember all your routines when you're on stage?
I don't.
A lot of comedians say that they just wing it. Do you have notebooks or pointers?
I've got my notebook here, actually. Right. I've got 2 different notebooks.
Right.
Like, I guess an example is that like I write them. When I'm like writing stuff, I will just like write it out. But then if I'm doing like a show, or something where it's a bit longer, I like to bullet point out the bits that I'm going to do in advance.
Sure.
And then if it's a really new bit, what I've started doing is saying it on the way to the gig. So like I'll maybe like have it in my phone or something, so I can just check I'm doing it right. But as I'm walking there, I'll just say it once, and I'll put my headphones in so it looks like I'm on the phone.
Yeah.
Or it's even better now with masks, because you can wear them on the tube and no one can see that you're talking to yourself.
Exactly.
So that's a good way to do it. I think that's the most useful way, but it's just like it requires a bit of effort. And sometimes if I'm feeling lazy, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to do that, and then I pay the price on stage because I miss out half of it. But yeah. I think with the ones where it depends as well on the style of comedy, because I imagine comedians who like kind of logically unpack something, it's very easy to kind of know where the routine is going because they're following like the logic, whereas I find like my ideas and my bits are like a bit all over the place and a bit manic, and like I always draw in spider diagrams, so like there's no one way to go about it, and so I'm kind of like, last night I did a gig where I got about halfway through one of my ideas and then remembered that I hadn't said it, and I was like, right, we're going back because I want to do that bit as well.
Just remember that bit I was talking about. Yeah. Here's the link.
Yeah, exactly.
That happens. Similar thing happened with me. Other than my blog, the most creative thing I did, I wrote a short play, which myself and my friend put on with a director. This was to raise money for Comic Relief. We did 3 shows, and the play is called The Applicant, and it's basically about me coming down to London from Carlisle trying to find a job, and I've got a successful girlfriend in it, and I've never had an interview, and as the play goes on, there's lots of plot devices, but as the play goes on, he keeps going for more interviews, gets more confident, and when he gets offered a job, he dies. He never gets a job. That's the whole point. What
a twist!
So the last scene is him at the gates of heaven or hell or whatever, being interviewed by God, saying, "We've been watching you on planet Earth, and we think the ideal job of you here is to interview corpses to go into heaven or hell." And I just shouldn't end of.
That sounds great.
So it went through the roof. However, on the first night we did it, we'd rehearsed it for 10 weeks, and it was literally me sitting in a waiting room looking terrified, my first interview, looking at the audience, talking to them, so it was monologue. And then my friend had come on, do all the different accents and be the different interviews. First night I ran out, I was like a rabbit in headlights, and I completely lost my way, and I just
blanked.
And I blanked, and I thought, this is extraordinary, because I rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. I know it's different with writing for the theatre, but similar things. Do you have tricks to bring points back and to remember things like that, or for stand up, or because you've always got the audience to banter from? I suppose.
Yeah, it is definitely different, because I did a few at uni. I was in plays as well, and I know that feeling of like it is.
It's terrifying.
It's terrifying.
It's just like, I want to go home.
I still have nightmares where I'm on stage and I've forgotten lines. It's never for comedy. It's always for like a play.
Yeah.
Because like you said in comedy, if you forget a bit, you can just chat to the audience until you remember it.
Yeah.
But if you start doing that in a play, they'd be like, "What the fuck is going on?"
I never made the same mistake twice. Right.
Yeah.
So, let me read this next one out, because I think this is wonderful. You've been a finalist for the Chortle Student Comedy Award in 2018, a 2 North Down New Act of the Year finalist in 2019, a Funny Women finalist in 2020, and a Leicester Square New Act of the Year finalist in 2021. Many congratulations. Well deserved.
Thank you. Always the finalist, never the winner.
Yeah, you're getting there. Describe the experiences. In other words, what's your view of competitions? Do you think they're a good thing for a comedian?
Oh, it's such a weird one. I think they have been for me very useful.
Sure.
In terms of like they were how for me I kind of got enough like I guess like attention and kind of credits to approach like agents and to approach bookers, and you know they kind of they're just like something to have in the email to be like, look, someone said I'm good at this, listen to me. But I just think as like a structure in place in comedy, like I don't know how useful they are, other than because of what they've kind of become. Like inherently, I don't know how useful they are because it's such a weird. Comedy is such a beautiful subjective thing where there's someone for everyone's taste. So to be like, this is the best person at it this year feels a bit strange. But like, I think the thing is also I found them very stressful up until the last two I did. Right. The first one, which was the Chortle one, I was so like excited to do it, and also the previous year I'd seen it. It was a final with all men, so I was like already raging about that when I entered. So, but I cared like so much about it, and I would just say it because I think it's embarrassing, but it's also like someone else might have done this in this situation. Afterwards, I cried because I was like really gutted that I didn't get like anything. Oh. And I just cared so much about it, and I really thought that like I did the best that I could, and like am I just not good at which is, you know, such a catastrophic like way of seeing it. I think it was the adrenaline of it all, and I just found it like such an intense thing. I really hated the feeling of after you've done your set. Before you've done your set, obviously it's terrifying, but like after you've done your set until the end of the competition, like the nerves that I got and like the anxiety about it just like destroyed me. And I just cried, and all my friends were like, it's fine. And I was like, I know, but the emotions just coming out. And then after that, which is, you know, so funny to look back on now, to think that I was like crying my eyes out. But after that, I never got that upset about them, because it was that thing of what I said earlier about how you kind of start to realise like the only thing in my control is my material, and my performance, and whatever panel of like quote unquote industry judges are deciding that night doesn't mean that an audience didn't find you funny, or doesn't mean that you'll never be found funny again. But it is just a very strange, like, kind of objective standpoint to be putting on a subjective art.
Sure, yeah.
But like, also, I guess even if you took comedy competitions away, there would still be something, because there's, you know, so many people trying to break into an industry that like I kind of get why they exist, but I think for performers as well, they can be really, really disheartening. And I think if you're not friends with people, or you don't know people who got knocked out, who like have now done, you know, whatever TV show, but got knocked out of, you know, the Chortle Award in their semi-finals, then you kind of you can forget that like there are plenty of other ways to get into the industry. And I think that was what was most useful for me, was like knowing and seeing people who hadn't won a competition and were still being successful comedians.
I think it's all about experience. The more gigs you get, the better, good or bad, the better a comedian you become, because you learn from the experience of doing the gig, however good or bad it is, and you move on. And if you keep going, your confidence will go higher, and you will become a better comedian, a more assured comedian for it.
Yeah, and also I guess like the more you do, the kind of like less every gig is worth. Not in a bad way, but do you know what I mean? Like it's like you get a greater perspective, and like not every gig means the world.
Yeah.
And not every gig is like this huge judgment on whether you're a good comedian or not, and you kind of see it more as like a process rather than like every night is a. When I first started, and I think when I was mostly doing the same kind of like, you know, 5 minutes of jokes I had or 10 minutes of jokes, every night is kind of like, this is a test for me to check whether I'm funny or not. Whereas now it's kind of more like, oh, like this is just fun.
Exactly. Yeah. It's such a positive thing, but it must be daunting to think about the performance. But once you're out there, hopefully it'll all disintegrate, and once you're in front of the microphone, you're away.
Yeah, 100%. I think also those competitions were all like slightly different. The Funny Women one was during the pandemic, so it was a final that was live in the sense of we all performed our stand-up live at the Comedy Store, but there was no audience.
Right.
It was all on Zoom.
Wow.
Apart from the 8 industry judges who sat there in silence.
Oh dear.
So that was a tricky gig. I'm going to make these
people laugh.
That was a tricky gig, but they did have loads of really good snacks backstage.
Well,
which is
there's always something.
that was my main takeaway from it.
Yeah. Whenever I see you, you appear to be very confident on stage and fearless with an audience. You're very easygoing with an audience. Do you suffer from any nerves before you go on stage, and how do you cope with them?
100%. I get very nervous, and I didn't realise. Well, thank you for saying that. Also, that I come across like
My
that.
pleasure.
That's very nice. I have been told that like I do come across as very confident, and the times where I've been most nervous, people have always said they couldn't tell, and I didn't really realise this until like kind of more recently that I have some sort of ability in myself to just fake it completely. Like I will have, every time you've seen me, I will have been very nervous before, especially because you've seen me at Always Be Comedy, great gig, and the lineups are always incredible. I'm just as terrified of whether the audience will like me as to whether the other comedians who I've like idolised for years will like me. So the pressure's always on. I depending on how nervous I am and kind of what the context is, I kind of have like slight little routines where it's like as simple as like I do like a tongue warm up.
Right.
It's like where it's like you like do like a muscle warm up with your mouth, just to, because if I get nervous, sometimes I'll like trip over my words a little bit. So like doing that kind of calms me down to be like, oh, I know I've done my warm up, so I won't be as like babbly. Or I do like a kind of stretch if I'm like doing an hour show, like a work in progress thing, which is what I've been doing a lot of at the moment at the time of recording. I do a lot of like stretching my body and like shaking my body. I do kind of like, I think it's from doing plays. It's I do the kind of warm ups that the directors used to make us do. But in terms of like nerves, other than that, like I don't have any. It all has to be physical, because that's the only thing that I can distract myself with, is being like, okay, we've got to like get my body, like shake the energy out of my body. Sounds like I'm talking like an absolute lunatic, but you can't. You just have to pass the time until you're about to go on stage, and then I just fake it. And I think I've done like a lot of jobs in my life where I felt underqualified and kind of faked. I think I can talk my way through an interview, and then sometimes end up in a job where I'm slightly underqualified and have to fake it a little bit. So I think I've just in all areas of my life, I'm very used to being like, okay, just hide the fact that you have no idea what you're doing and just figure it out.
I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
So, as I said before, when you go on stage, all the nerves go as soon as you start, or do you survey an audience, or do you get a vibe from it, or?
It's interesting. I think it kind of depends. They don't always all go. I fare a really lovely audience than sometimes. But I would say quite often it's like a constant ongoing process. And I think when you have a really lovely audience, it's just the best. And you're like, I can relax for the rest of this. But sometimes it feels like a constant, like, you know, I've got you, and then I can feel you going again, and I need to catch you. But then sometimes just treating them like they are a really nice audience, they kind of get tricked into becoming one, and like not getting.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and like not getting phased if something, if they see something, what I do sometimes, if I'm doing like a new bit, I'm thinking about like a gig I did last night where I just did all very new material, and like if something doesn't work, if you just don't get phased and just carry on, then they either don't realise that was even an attempt at a joke, no, like she was just saying that, or they're just like, oh, it's fine, like she's not worried about it, so we don't have to be worried. So I think even if I'm kind of surveying the audience and being like, oh, they're not, I keep seeing them kind of lose faith in me a little bit, I need to get them back, I would never show that. No. I would just completely stay exactly the same so that they have no idea what's going on inside my head.
And following on from that, I suppose, was there ever a point from when you started comedy to now where you thought, I can do this really well, I can make a career out of this is me? Was there ever a point so far, or is that yet to come?
I think I don't know if I've had like a specific point, but I guess I'm kind of having it because I'm doing comedy. I'm like, something must be okay about what I'm doing because it is working.
It's working. You're hilarious.
Thank you. But I haven't had that like specific moment yet. But I think one of the things that I think is very interesting, especially is like, I imagined one of the slightly like newer people who you're speaking to is when you see yourself on a lineup with like loads of comedians who are just like incredible people who you've like watched from before you did comedy, and like getting onto those lineups is like always a moment where I'm always like, I must be on the right path.
It's working and it's deserved. Yeah. Without a doubt. Let's move on to Edinburgh. I am very fortunate to have my holidays every year at the Edinburgh Fringe. I first went in 2005, and I've been going every year apart from the 2 years that of course, with the pandemic. And I go for a week and I see about 50 shows. I cannot get enough of it, and I need a holiday by the time I come back.
Yeah.
Because my liver gets battered, I'm tired.
A marathon of comedy.
Yeah. Can you tell me what your first Edinburgh festival was like?
Yeah, so the first Edinburgh I went to, as I mentioned, I didn't perform. I worked as a receptionist.
Right.
A receptionist intern at the Assembly Festival venue. Yeah. Like, they're like kind of staff reception. It wasn't like one of the box office things. Right. And I also like helped out on a burlesque show as like a assistant, and it was this mad experience of like, I had never been to Edinburgh, I had no idea what to expect, but I'd heard someone be like, oh, if you're interested in performing, I thought I wanted to be an actor at that point, and they were like, oh, you need to check out the Edinburgh Fringe. So I like found this job to apply to, and like just went up and was terrified because I'd never been in a city on my own for that long. I was 18. I was like working on a reception job where I had no idea what I was doing, as I said, like absolutely faking it. And I loved every second of it, and it was just like the best month of my life. Obviously it was a really great way as well, because I was kind of working like two jobs. So I wasn't making a loss on the Fringe, probably the only time in my life, where I also had a staff pass, so I could go and see shows, which is a really, really good way to experience the Fringe for the first time, because it meant I wasn't being like picky about what I saw, and I kind of got that Fringe vibe of like, just go and see whatever's that's on at this time that I can get into. And I saw just like the incredible like variety of things that I saw, I think gave me like a really good entry point to
That's
the
the
Fringe.
magic of it. It's so extreme, and
Yeah.
I do a spreadsheet where I have to plan all my days. It's just the
Yeah.
What year was this when you first went up?
I went up in 2016 as a
2016.
receptionist.
And when was your first performance there?
2017 I was in a sketch show there.
Right.
And then 2018 and 19 I did split half-hour shows, which were very fun, very different experiences. The 2018 was like a very, very fun show with like a really good like friend of mine where we were just like having a laugh the whole time. It was 3 p.m. every day. We were in like a free Fringe venue that was like falling apart beneath our feet.
Brilliant.
On Sundays we had to do it in the car park because a gospel choir was using the room.
That's brilliant.
Which is exactly the Fringe experience. The year after 2018, it was a bit of a harder year. Like I had a bunch of family like loss, well not a bunch, like a family loss happened on the like right before, and on the first day of the Fringe I had to fly back for a funeral and then come back in the evening and do a show, which was honestly insane. And at the end I was like, of the show, the audience were very nice, but I was like, really sorry if I'd been weird, like I was at a funeral today and everyone thought it was a joke, and I was like, no, this isn't a joke, like
Wow.
this is actually true. But that year as well, we were at like 9 p.m, we were in like a massive room. It was really hard to make it feel full apart from at the weekends, but that was like a good learning one, whereas the year before was like a really fun one. And yeah, so I feel like I've had like a few different varieties of Fringe
experience. So 2020 and 2021 obviously didn't happen. Are you going up this year with a solo show?
Yeah, I'm doing my first.
I will be there. I will make a point of seeing it,
much.
definitely, because
get it in your spreadsheet.
Well, yeah, definitely you'll be on there, because I turned 55 in August, and the Fringe is 75 this year, so it's a special one. So I'm so pleased you're doing your solo show there.
Perfect.
I wish you every
celebration.
Success. Definitely. So, talking of seeing you live, I've seen you perform at Always Be Comedy, both live and online in 2021, which you were superb. Please, can you describe your writing process and where you get your ideas from? If you have a writing process, you might not.
I kind of have a few different ones, I think. At the moment, it's kind of a bit sporadic in the sense of, because I'm working towards an hour show, I'm kind of like focused on creating that, and like bits of that will come in if I'm doing like a 20-minute set somewhere else.
Sure.
Like I'll weave some of it in to see if it works outside the context of the show. And because my show doesn't really have like a theme or a story, it's not like a storytelling show necessarily, it's kind of about my life. So the kind of writing process and ideas just come from like what I decide to talk about. Like I don't feel like I'm trying to write anything specific at the moment. So it'd just be stuff that I find funny basically, or I think might be funny. And stuff that I think is like honest and as we spoke about earlier, like just really trying to kind of be truthful with the audience, and yeah, just kind of explain like who I am and what I'm doing. But also I don't think I've done these bits at any of the gigs that you've been to, because they're kind of a more recent thing, but I've got a few more slightly surreal bits and a few kind of more chatty bits where like I'm just trying to experiment with like different types of comedy, I guess, and not get too nervous about trying something and it failing. As I said earlier, like my writing process is like I love a notebook and like like doing a spider diagram, or just like sometimes I'll just set a timer for like 5 minutes and be like, I just have to write about this topic for 5 minutes, not necessarily any jokes, but just to like see what thoughts I have on it. And then sometimes sometimes that will work and I'll have something that kind of mostly works first time, or I'll spend like a day writing something and it will be like, this will never work. Like I've had bits where I've been really, really hammering away at them and I'm just like, I just can't get this to work. So then I go and try a different bit. You know, I'm not very like structured in the way I will go about it, but I will just kind of keep trying different things.
Yeah. And following on from that, you've written for Frankie Boyle's New World Order on the BBC. You've written for Radio 4's News Jack, and you've written for Radio 4's The Now Show, which I used to be in the audience at all the time. It's wonderful. Do you think there's a difference with writing for TV and radio as opposed to live stand-up comedy?
Yeah, definitely, because for all those shows I wasn't writing for myself.
Right.
I was either writing, you know, for someone else or for like a generic, whoever's going to say this. So you kind of, it has to just be a very well-structured joke that works for the tone of the show rather than the tone of a comedian or myself.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to detach your own voice from it a little bit and just find something funny in an idea that doesn't rely on like your own personality. And I find it so much harder because also it can't be relied necessarily on it being delivered in a specific way or anything like that. So I do find it, and also all those shows are pretty much topical comedy, which I find scary because I'm like, what if I get the facts wrong? But it definitely feels like doing like a really hard exercise at the gym afterwards, because you're like, I was properly working my writing muscles for that. But yeah, it's definitely a very different beast.
I think again though, because you're doing that, it gives you more experience as a solo performer. You know, when you're on stage, your ideas are vast because you're writing for different people as well.
Yeah.
Who are your favourite comedians, past and present?
Oh, what a question! Such a stressful question to be asked.
That must change.
The first comedian that I went to see live, I think my dad took me to see Eddie Izzard.
Wow.
Which is great introduction to comedy.
Wow.
But I didn't watch I haven't watched a lot of like old comedians, i.e. like the greats of the past. Like I will say, I hope people don't get angry at this, I tend to prefer British comedians, or like I really love a lot of comedians from New Zealand and like Canada. American comedians I don't, but I think it's because I only watch them online, you know. Right. I find it harder to like connect with like a Netflix special than I do with like being in the room. So I think part of it is just because I've seen more live comedy in only in the UK. Yeah. But I really love like Mae Martin, Rose Matafeo. Yeah. One of my new favourites, just because I've done loads of gigs with him recently, Carl Donnelly.
Oh, he's brilliant. He's brilliant.
So great.
Yeah.
Great.
He's so natural, and then he kills you with a one-liner or a story. Yeah. He's just wonderful as well. He's been on here, and he was wonderful.
Yeah. I saw you had him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would just be, you know, it's so often like I'll gig with someone and be like, oh my god, they're amazing. They're one of my favourite. I gigged with Sean McLaughlin, who I think you've had on here as well. Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah,
and he's someone who I hadn't
quick.
seen live before the pandemic, but I'd listened to his special, his album, his Hail Mary.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is so good. And I saw him live and I was like, fantastic. Oh, yeah, great stuff.
Yeah.
I always really liked James Acaster before I started performing. Not that I don't like him now, but that's one of the ones from before I started performing as well. I was like, he's just great.
He is genuinely one of the best. I have a testimonials page on my blog, and he wrote on it, if I wasn't a comedian, I would happily sit next to Richard Gill all day and make him laugh. And I just thought that was wonderful.
That's the best compliment. Yeah, 100%.
And I just thought, that's him. You know, he is so... All these magical comedians who can take one word and fly with it is just incredible to see.
Well, that's like I said earlier about when I first started, and I thought like, oh, you pick one thing and just write about that, was because I was a huge fan of his, and I was like, well, that I must be able to do that now. I'm like, that is the biggest skill in the world. It takes years.
The sister question to that is, like me, do you go to a lot of comedy gigs as a member of the audience, or have you before you were a comedian?
Yeah, I still do. I mean, I'm kind of limited now that I perform like most nights, but having said that, if I look at my past month and the nights I've had off, both of them I've been at comedy shows. So yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. And I hope I never lose that. Like, I don't ever want to be the sort of person who stops going to watch it, because I did a work in progress show like a couple of weekends ago, and Catherine Bohart was on after me.
Superb.
And it was fantastic, and I stayed to watch her show, and I wasn't planning on it because I thought like I'll probably be a bit like exhausted. I'm so glad I stayed. It was just like fantastic. I hadn't seen an hour show for a while, and it was just like, this is like what I love about comedy. It was just so good, and I just felt so like happy, and like fell in love with it again.
I've been following her career very early on, and it's so good. It's another reason why I write the blog. It's so good to watch comedians starting off and then watching them develop. And she is a classic case in point. I saw her last year at the Camden Fringe, and she was just hysterically funny. She was so confident in what she was doing. It's just wonderful to see. When you're on a comedy bill, do you tend to stay and watch the other comedians on the bill?
I always try to, unless I'm like the time. Recently, if I'm very far away from home, I don't, because otherwise I was doing it, and then I was getting like 5 hours of sleep a night just because of how late it was taking me to get home.
You can enjoy yourself too much.
Yeah, exactly. But I always want to, and it's just so interesting. Like, even if it's someone you've seen before, I really like watching it again to see how it's changed, and like you kind of get a little glimpse into the craft. So like I always think there's something to be gained from staying and watching as a comedian, and just also because it's fun.
Exactly, yeah. I can't think of anything more positive than watching a comedy show. What's not to love? How have you found online gigs as opposed to live gigs, and what do you think the future is for comedy with all the carry-on that we've been seeing?
I really hope the online gigs stay, because I think they make it so much more accessible for a massive audience. And I actually, I really don't mind them. I think it's because I had a background in, doing YouTube videos and speaking to a camera. I don't find it awkward. And I don't mind not necessarily having the laugh straight away or, ever. I find it very easy to just keep talking to a laptop and not have anyone in the room. I really don't mind it at all. Though I think for some people I think I was very lucky in that I didn't have to have a massive adjustment to that. I'd done it before, whereas I can imagine if you spent your whole career doing live, it must have been very odd. I think I definitely wouldn't want them to be the only thing that exists, but I really hope that they keep going. And I think also live streaming shows that are happening with an audience is a great thing to have happen now, because I don't think that was happening before the pandemic, and it's wonderful.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah, it's so great.
Without a doubt, my view is exactly that. I couldn't have got through the pandemic without online shows, but when they first started, there there was no audio to them. I would go to Jarlath Regan's Irishman Abroad comedy one on a Friday. I'd go to Always Be Comedy. I'd go to Sean James's Happy Mondays one. They were all online, all really good shows. But there was no audio. So I was sitting here looking at four walls, laughing out loud. I thought I was going to be taken away. And when they opened up the audio so the comedians could get banter and get the things with the jokes going, it was an absolute dream. It worked so well. But ultimately, you can't beat live. I love to go out on a weekend, have a few drinks with friends, and then go to a comedy show, because a live comedy show is of the moment. You know, you never know what's going to happen, and that's the magic of it. It's an extraordinary thing. I've so much enjoyed talking to you. It's been an absolute joy.
Thank you so much. It's been so nice to talk about comedy as well with someone who like loves it as much as I do. Like, I'm still a massive comedy nerd in my heart. So.
It's lovely, isn't it? Just before you go, is there anything else you'd like to say? Have you got any gigs coming up? Have you got any podcasts? Where can people find you on social media? That sort of thing.
I think I'll just say my social media because I don't know in advance necessarily. And if you follow me on social media, you'll know that I will be promoting things non-stop. So my Twitter is at Ania Mags, ANIAMAGS, and then my Instagram is at Ania Magliano. So yeah, I'll be posting on those. But other than that, just thank you for having me. And it's so amazing that like to have someone who's like as supportive and like into live comedy. It makes it feel like so worthwhile.
Well, you're very kind. I mean, it's a ditto. The comedians like yourself are extraordinary. You make me laugh so much. I'm so looking forward to seeing you live again soon, and I'm definitely coming to see you at the Edinburgh Fringe.
Oh,
so
great! I'll see you there. We'll be celebrating your birthday.
Definitely. All the very best to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you.